So much to talk about there. Joining me in the studio right now, I am so thrilled to say, is economist and political theorist at Webster University in Vienna, Ralph Schoellhammer. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Very excited. We dragged you over to Britain because we wanted to get to meet you. When you've been on my show, the pretty old studio, online, we've been inundated with messages from people going, get Ralph in the studio. So
you do know they say that flattery is the highest form of intimidation.
There you are.
Consider me highly intimidated.
Well, by popular demand, you asked for him, we've given him to you. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about, first of all, the Climate Change Committee in the UK. Unelected, unaccountable, a body of people who, I mean, just talk frankly, as far as I can tell, most of the time, abject nonsense, telling us that we can achieve net zero carbon emissions in this country by 2050, and it probably won't cost very much. Worst case scenario, £1 trillion. That's a lot of money last time I looked. Others saying it could be 3 trillion, it could be more. The Treasury said we won't give a costing because we don't actually know. Their argument is that there are jobs to be had from it. It will be at the forefront of the global move towards this move to net zero, and it's the right thing to do. That's their stance. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he decided to announce, I'm thrilled to say, that he would actually delay some of his net zero targets. Let's just have a little listen, a little watch of what Rishi Sunak had to say about why he thinks net zero is actually too expensive for households right now.
I've been thinking about these issues for a long time, and as Chancellor, I was concerned about the impact on families of some of the policies that were being mooted. When you think about it, as I mentioned, policies that would cost a typical family around the country £5,000, £10,000, £15,000, and we seem to be on autopilot to just adopt these things. I didn't think that was right at the time, and now as Prime Minister I've got an opportunity to change things.
So, Ralph Schoellhammer, the Prime Minister basically said he was pushed back by 5 years when we'd have to only be allowed to buy a new petrol or diesel car, well, only electric cars, not even a hybrid, and various rules in terms of energy efficiency and all of the rest of it. I welcome this. Not enough, but a good start. Now the Climate Change Committee is saying, oh, that's just going to cost us more. Are they right?
Well, let me say three things very real quick. The first one is I'm so surprised that, Great Britain left the EU, but apparently now you do things worse than Brussels, kind of moving things to bodies outside of the government, unelected bodies, kind of unelected bureaucracy. So that's a very odd thing. The claim about that in a couple of years this will all pay for itself or become cheaper, we have a very simple argument why this is not true. At the moment, taxpayer money goes into the renewable sector. So basically taxpayers finance wind, solar and all these other projects.
Subsidizing it.
We're subsidizing them, but they never paid back. This is the problem. So you cannot say something is getting cheaper if it never pays into the system.
Hold on a minute. We're constantly told renewable energy is so much cheaper and electric cars will be cheaper and everything's going to be cheaper. This is why we should be rushing headfirst towards these policies.
Well, this is because the way they calculate it, right? What they do usually, politicians and also think tanks, they look, for example, at wind and solar, and they look, let's say, at solar, how much electricity it produces under the perfect conditions, how much wind produces under the perfect conditions, and then they say,
so the wind blowing is good.
Exactly right. Then it's cheap. But the problem is, of course, electricity must be available when people need it, and not just when the wind blows or when the sun shines. So what they then also do is they never mention the cost of the backup systems, right? If the wind is not blowing, then of course you need a gas power plant, you need a nuclear power plant, you need a coal power plant, and those costs are never included. So there's a lot of
even though they are required.
You need them. It's like
hold on a minute. Everyone says in a few years' time we're going to have batteries that we're going to be able to store all the solar and wind power.
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I love it.
That's technology that does not exist. Can it exist?
It literally does not exist.
It does not
right
exist.
Now.
We don't have it. I always say this to the critics. I say, give me a pilot project. Like, let's take a medium-sized city in England and say, take this city and run it solely on batteries, wind, solar, and EVs. Right? 50,000, 60,000. Give me a pilot project. Like any business would build a prototype before they would move forward with the things that the government in Europe, but also in Great Britain wants to do. Give us a prototype. Say, okay, we have a city here.
Look at this amazing success.
Precisely. Then we can talk about it, but they don't do it. No, there is none. Because you can look at it from this perspective. Imagine you look for an internet provider, and the internet provider says to you, the internet is great. It's super high speed. It's perfect. But it only works 10% of the time. And we can't really tell you when. So what you're then going to do is you say, okay, I might take that internet, but I also have to take up, a secondary provider that I really always have.
Are you actually saving money at that point?
Exactly.
Okay. So, I mean, this is the thing. A lot of the stuff that's talked about is very pie in the sky. And again, a lot of the costings are just plucked from thin air with technologies that don't exist. When the Climate Change Committee talks about, well, you know, if we don't insulate homes and we don't require landlords to get their homes that they're renting out to a reasonable level of energy efficiency and insulation, or indeed people selling their homes to have to reach a certain level. I mean, that policy originally was going to basically kill off the rental market, kill off people. Lots of people simply would find it impossible to sell their homes. If you've got to spend 15, 20, 30 grand to sell your home, and your home's not even worth, you know, very much in large parts of the country, you just simply can't do it. You don't have the money. Very sensible for the Prime Minister to get rid of those policies. I still find it extraordinary. They were policies which no one had thought through the implications. But is it not right for the Climate Change Committee to say, look, but this will mean that people will have higher bills because their insulation, it would actually help them save money?
On the long run, you can do something with insulation, but there's this idea that it's only heating, for example. Heating alone will not make a difference. And they make the broader argument that there will be this green revolution with all these new jobs. Yeah. And again, we see it in every industry. For example, a solar farm, a wind farm, those are not high-paying jobs. We talked about this previously. You import 90% of it from China, then you assemble it, and then it sits there. Those are not high-paying jobs. Like, this is the difference, for example, with the oil and gas industry. Let me say one final thing, because there was an energy revolution that brought everything that the renewable sector promises us to reality. And that was the fracking and shale revolution in the United States. In 12 years, the US earned $1.6 trillion just because they put their energy into shale. They reduced their carbon emissions because gas is cleaner than coal. So there is something to be done. So if Rishi Sunak is really serious about this, he would say, listen, we have a model that works. Let's do fracking. Let's do exploration of fossil fuels, because we can bring down emissions, we can bring down bills, and I think this would ultimately also save his premiership.
And the green zealots, they don't want even the fracked gas. They're not even that keen, most of them, on nuclear power, even though that's incredibly clean.
And they don't care about emissions, right? You see how the language, even within the UN, has changed, right? Originally, it was all about emissions. So now we have good technologies, carbon capture and sequestration. Chevron, for example, has developed a technology where they can make jet fuel out of milk jugs. Fantastic things. They sue all of them because they say, well, it's not really about emissions, it's about combustion. They want to get out of fossil fuels because their true agenda is, and it's not a conspiracy, their true agenda is there are too many people on the planet, there are too many of us, and we need to reduce them. This is where you've nailed it, and this is the key thing. This is Malthusian idea that we've got too many people. Exactly.
We have to get rid of them somehow. Who are we planning? Who are we planning to get rid of? And this is the concern, isn't it? That actually it's this idea that human beings are somehow a plague on the planet. We are bad for the planet. We're a virus on the planet. Language like that has been used. And the Industrial Revolution is the worst thing that's ever happened to human beings and the planet, as opposed to the reason why we've got lights and heat and children could be put in incubators if they're born too early and live, and we live to 70s, 80s, 90s and don't die when we're 1 year old or 30 years old if we're lucky. These things that have given us this amazing life that most people in the West have, and we want, do we not, people in the developing world to have. They're saying that that's something we need to turn back on.
Well, can I give you one number? I think because this is so fascinating. We globally, we use about the energy equivalent of 100 billion barrels of oil. That is in work, is the same as 500 billion people. Like, this is what people must understand. The energy sector provides us with the same kind of labor where otherwise we would need, and I really want to say this number again, but we would need 500 billion people. In the industrialized world, like in Great Britain, the amount of energy that we use every day is the same as having 240 people working for you non-stop, 24/7, 365.
And that's making the machines that
Precisely.
food efficiently and all the products that we buy.
So we are an energy-blind society. We assume it's just there. And then I always like to say, it's like, in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, where you have the Eloi, right, and the Morlocks. And we tend to forget that the things we debate from, transgenderism to everything else, we have this luxury because there are these industries.
Because we're not toiling in fields and struggling to survive.
Precisely.
Russell Quirk, what do you want to say?
Well, two ironies here. We're also purchasing fracked gas from the United States, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
Which seems rather ridiculous given that we don't want to use fracked gas. The other thing, of course, is that the consumption or the existence of carbon as it's emitted from the likes of China and India and the United States has increased something like 300% over the last 5 years or whatever it is. even if we got to net zero, our contribution to carbon on a global scale is 1% of all emissions.
So it won't make any
What is the
difference.
point of us doing it?
Oh,
if
no,
China
but we're going
and
to be
America and everybody else is just going to keep
No,
increasing
apparently
their
we're going to
carbon
be
output.
leading, and everyone's been looking at us and saying, oh, well done.
So
And when
the
our
Chinese
prime
will give in.
ministers stand on the world stage, everyone's
The
going to be
Chinese will
applauding
give
them.
in.
Meanwhile, we'll be getting them out of office because our lives have become poorer and colder
We're in the
and
Middle
darker.
Ages.
I mean, one final point, Ralph Schoellhammer, which is I find extraordinary that the people on the green side never admit to, is that virtually all of the wind turbines, the solar panels, the electric vehicles, they're all produced in China. What does China mostly use for fuel?
Coal. And by the way,
The dirtiest fuel we know of.
And it's not declining. Right? This is, as you mentioned, right? It's a little bit the arrogance of the West. So we really think that Modi, Xi Jinping, that they get up in the morning and say, before I do anything, I have to look what Sunak, what Scholz, what they have to say. They have 3 billion people together to take care of. They don't care what anybody in Europe says, and neither should they, right? Because that's not their priority.
Not their job.
So this idea that the West will lead by example and everybody will then say, well, if the West does it, we have to do it too.
Yeah.
We have been trying this in every area, right? From democracy to liberalism, and most countries say, you guys do you, but it's not really for us. And in the energy sector, it's exactly the same thing.
It's such a pleasure having you in the studio. Thank you so much indeed. More from Russell Quirk coming up. Rolf Schoellhammer, economist and political theorist at Webster University in Vienna. Thank you for that.